You realize there's nobody.
Well, we'll give it a minute. Hopefully people will come back because apparently they were so enthralled with what I had to say. Maybe they just assumed that we were not going live tonight. Is that what it was?
I don't know. I'm surprised I'm even able to be live tonight. I wasn't able to shower or anything today.
It's just one of those days, guys. It's one of those days. Eventually you will hear this message, whoever ends up watching, if anybody does.
I don't know, because do we ever even use any of this in our clips? I never see our intros in our clips.
Well, we had the intro with the graphic that we had put up there. So we've got one person that's here. So maybe that person will hit the like button, and then they'll share, and then the next person will share, and then the next thing you know, hello!
I'm Jen.
I'm Peter, and it's not been a good day, but we have to pick up our spirits because we've got two amazing guests coming on this evening. Now, I obviously gave a lot of my energy specifically to the State of the Union recap, and of course, the mendacity of people in the Democratic establishment who try to convince you that it's even possible that Marjorie Taylor Greene could be unseated through a general election. That's funny. But as we all know, a lot of politics involves a lot of grifting, and that's why people don't want to be involved in it. So we've got two people watching now, which is wonderful.
You know, I'm always torn between the idea of in any way sounding like I'm discouraging discourse and challenges and all of that, because I, of all people, know that everybody who doesn't like when you're challenging says things like, you know, why don't you try running for this, or this would be a better use of your time. And so I am kind of loath to ever do that. But in the case of the Marjorie Taylor Greene thing, it's just ridiculous. Like, they're just completely wasting everybody's time and money. And there are so many other more important races.
Think about it. Hey, Doomslayer, welcome. And remember to hit the like button and share. Very important. You know, if you think about it, the whole thing with Marjorie is the Trump phenomenon on a micro level.
What time is CJ coming on?
It's supposed to come on in the next few minutes. Hey, Mel, hit the like button and share.
Because
great to see you.
we could wait until there's more people to do my very special initiation.
Well, you know, I think your initiation might be a great idea. Not
we're gonna hold off on doing
the
initiation.
We are. And so one of the things that we want to talk to you guys about, which I think is very, very important, and the one thing that I think just, you know, we talk about the progressive movement, but just the non-corporate movement in general is not very good at is planning ahead. You see, when somebody like Mayor Pete puts all of his infrastructure into Iowa in 2020. Do you really think that infrastructure is not still sitting around there waiting for 2024? Never know what might happen. Progressives, non-corporate progressives, need to be very keen and aware of how things are going to go moving forward. And so one of the reasons we are inviting a wonderful gentleman on our podcast tonight, CJ Peterson of the Iowa Democratic Party, is because the party's up to its old tricks, and it's a long ways away from the primary. That's actually 2 years, less than 2 years, Jen, less than 2 years away.
What primary?
The Iowa.
But why do you think there's going to be a primary?
Oh, I'm pretty well, there's going to be at least one primary.
Democrats don't like primaries.
They may not like primaries, but
especially when they're sitting in the White House already. Like, the idea of a primary hasn't even occurred, really.
Oh, come on, man.
It's good. For a sitting president to be primaried is very unusual. So to think that, like, to presume that's going to happen.
Well, after the speech that I saw last night, it would not surprise me in the very least if that is what is ultimately going to happen. But it's not going to happen the way that we, the citizenry of America, think it's going to happen. But what we are going to do is we are going to learn a lot more about a very interesting detail that just came up the other day that a lot of politicos are not aware of. But I keep a close eye on everything that's going on.
He's political Sheldon. If anybody watches Big Bang Theory, he's political Sheldon.
Yes,
that's what I call him.
So without further ado, we are very excited to bring into the studio. We are all about the grassroots, and it doesn't get more grassroots than C.J. Peterson of the Iowa Democratic Party. Welcome to Generational Change.
Hi there. Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. Hi, it's nice to meet you.
Yeah, for sure. It's great to meet you. I put some, real, faces and voices to the names that I see on Twitter every day and retweet and subtweet. And
that's great. And we appreciate so much. And I'm happy to have somebody on from Iowa because really I've never been there. and I want to go because I have this whole Field of Dreams thing in my head. Like somehow
Dyersville,
I'm
Iowa.
just saying.
CJ, right off the bat, how far are you from Dyersville, by the way? And have you been?
It's just a short, 3.5 hour jog by car. So, not too far. But I'm in the southwest portion of the state, and then Dyersville is in the northeast corner. So the northeast corner is probably the more desirable part of the state. So if you're in that part of the state, you're probably in a pretty friendly place. So it's close to Wisconsin, close to Minnesota,
Yeah.
So as I'm sure you saw during last night's State of the Union, if you want to talk about the president's greatest failure, it was to not mention the environmental crisis at all. And so there was a little interesting thing that just happened in the state of Iowa with the Iowa Democratic Party. CJ, the floor is yours. Please let the audience know exactly what went down.
Yeah, absolutely. So in Iowa, we have one major authoritarian rumor, and that is the corn industry. And the corn industry is only second to the hog industry and the controlled animal feeding operations, CAFOs, that are dotting our landscape and stinking up the air. So the Iowa Democratic Party has, it had in our platform since 2016 at least, planks about opposition to carbon pipelines, as well as opposition to eminent domain abuse, which, when we say abuse, we mean it differently than some of our Republican friends mean it. We mean that you shouldn't steal somebody's property and give it to a corporation, right? And that should be just the very most basic thing that the government should be able to guarantee you, is that you're not going to lose your land or your home and have that be given to a government entity, or I'm sorry, a corporate entity to be used for profit, not the least of which is a carbon capture pipeline. So the Agriculture Secretary happens to be a former governor of Iowa, Tom Vilsack, and Governor Vilsack's Secretary Vilsack's son, Jess Vilsack, happens to be one of the major collaborators, and was just recently hired as counsel for the pipeline company that is building a carbon capture pipeline through about, I think it's 30 counties in Iowa. Now, there are 99 counties in Iowa, so you can imagine it's quite a few. Then it goes up through South Dakota as well. And essentially what we were asking for is, we're seeing voters out here in rural spaces. We're seeing farmers, we're seeing landowners, we're seeing people who are worried for the future. So they're showing up at these town meetings, they're showing up at their city councils and their county supervisor meetings, and they're begging for us not to take their land and build these pipelines. Now, one of the major financier behind this pipeline is Bruce Rastetter, and he is best known for operating a ventriloquist dummy that you might have seen give the response to President Biden last night, Kim Reynolds, who's our governor. He's a very talented man, can throw his voice real far away. And I almost think that when she kept looking off screen last night, I think she was looking at Bruce and he was nodding and smiling along. So anyway, long story short, the governor has a scheme to give private land to her corporate friends to build a pipeline, along with $600 million in tax breaks for these folks over the next several years.
That's just
so getting to the point of all this. So you would think,
what are the Dems going to do? What, pray tell, is the party of regular working people going to do to prevent this?
Well, that's exactly my question. I mean, I fancy myself a dirt road Democrat. If you go to my Twitter at CJ for Iowa, we're very grassroots. We're rural. We're proud of it, and so you would think, there are so few opportunities for rural Democrats to connect with the people we live around and that we are neighbors with and friends with. And that doesn't mean that these folks are bad people. It just means that there's a cultural disconnect that we need to figure out how to cross and bridge. And this is an issue that's a slam dunk. People on both sides of the political spectrum, all sides of the political spectrum, should be right hand in hand in lockstep on this. And it's one of those issues that we can come at from the perspective of, private property ownership, and Republicans support this issue. They support stopping the pipelines being, stealing their private land for corporate profit. And so my good friend Emma Schmidt, who is a environmental activist, also a rural Democrat, lives a county over from me, actually crafted a resolution by the Iowa Democratic Party, and it would have, if passed by the State Central Committee, of which we are both a part, it would have essentially made the official position of the Iowa Democratic Party, hey, by the way, this is in our platform, we oppose the building of this pipeline for where we're stealing we're stealing private property and giving it to corporations, and where we're giving away hundreds of millions of dollars of tax revenue to billionaires and millionaires, and we are also taking an enormous toll on the environment altogether. So the way that this carbon capture works, basically, if the pipeline leaks, it's an asphyxiant. So it will asphyxiate anyone within about a 4.5 mile radius if it leaks. Now, these pipelines, per federal regulations, are allowed to be built within 50 feet of a school, of a church, a daycare center, your house. And so, anyway, this isn't just your typical not in my backyard thing. This is like, if it's in my backyard, I'm going to die. And so we brought this to the Iowa Democratic Party, and it was killed on a procedural motion by some folks who essentially they don't look up this whole damn thing. And they said, well, we're for the jobs the pipeline is going to bring. And, as we saw in that, we know how that movie ends. We just saw it, right? So
sounds like I was going to say, it sounds like Don't Look Up.
Well, it's always that's always the argument that they give is about job creation. But there are so many other things that are such collateral damage with these pipelines. The missing Indigenous women situation is massive. And I wanted to ask you, so when we're talking about this, and we could be all not in my backyard, but let's be real. Whose backyards are these in? Where are these going? Like, this is not going to go through like wealthy areas. This isn't going to cross over like wealthy CAFO owner estate homes and whatever, right? Like, that's not how this works. And so what is it like there? Because I know in South Dakota, it's hugely an Indigenous problem that they have on Indigenous property, but what's the demographic really where this is going?
So in Iowa, it's largely, rural. It is largely white. However, the average area median income is $44,000 for a household of four. I mean, I'm sorry, like, nobody that has $44,000 to feed a family of four has a lobbyist working for them, and certainly none of them are operating the governor on Fox News as a ventriloquist dummy. So it's just really frustrating that the folks who have the most to lose are always the ones that have the least influence and the least impact in our government. And so essentially what we got to was this resolution. It was defeated on procedural grounds by some folks who, number one, they said that it was, it's not a settled issue because there are going to be union jobs that come from it. And I will tell you, never, ever has the environmental section of the party, that the folks who care about climate, never, ever have we fought against the union workers' rights to bargain, to organize, to have collective bargaining rights. Now, we're supposed to just roll over every time there's a potential to have a 6-month gig that's going to, absolutely destroy the environment, and then they all get to go back home to the big cities and leave us all out here alone. So, and that's not to say that there's no place for labor or what have you. It's just, I really would like to see labor and the environmental folks on the same side of this issue, because at the end of the day, we're all on the same side, and the more that we're bickering and fighting with each other, the more that the Republicans are winning and the pipeline's still going up.
That's what they're counting on. They want that fight, because because the reality is we're on the same side. Like, the people that like us that are not in charge, we're all on the same team. And so they do like to sort of intimate that, oh, well, if you're not supporting this, then you're anti-labor, which is ludicrous, because there's a million other ways they could be supporting labor and they're not doing it. If they care so much about labor, why aren't they passing the PRO Act? So like, there are so many things that they just use as bait to create friction where there doesn't need to be any friction.
Absolutely. And, and then, the insane thing about this entire ordeal is, you know, Emma, the woman who wrote who actually wrote the resolution, initially went viral because, in a tweet thread, because she tweeted about how the Iowa Democratic Party was ignoring this issue. That's what prompted the Iowa Democratic Party State Central Committee to look at it in the first place. And actually, Jamie Harrison, the chairman of the DNC, sent a message to uh, Ross Wilburn, who is the chairman of the Iowa Democratic Party, and said, "Hey, you guys should look into this because it's traction, and it's getting traction, and it's a rural issue." And like him or not, Jamie Harrison's a rural guy. He understands the issues better than probably any of us. And just seeing that it got DNC attention even, and it still couldn't break through the logjam of folks who just would rather go on to get along. And I don't know what the point of being on the State Central Committee is if we're not acting as a functioning political party or a functioning opposition party. Like, our job is not to be kitty cats. Like, our job is to be the pit bull and fight against the Republican obstruction and opposition to any kind of progress. And, too many folks in Iowa, the problem is, we've spent the last 50 years now as a Democratic activist organization where our purpose of getting involved in the Democratic Party is so that we can take selfies with presidential candidates rather than get something done. And I don't care if a presidential candidate never comes here again. I want something to change, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing about Iowa, is that it's a state that people really only care about when the primary is happening. Post that, it's a flyover state. It's a state that's a farming state, and it doesn't get the respect that it deserves in any way. And so the question I would have for you, CJ, is obviously we are just under 2 years away from the Iowa primary or caucus, depending on what they ultimately do. What would you recommend to a non-corporate candidate who's considering running, and what would ultimately be the difference this time? We know the tricks that they pulled in 16. We know the tricks that they pulled in 20. What do you think would be the key to making sure that in 24, that whoever that person would be to sort of carry the progressive torch, what do you think could be the difference in ultimately that coming to fruition, if you will?
Yeah, that's a great question. If you look at the Iowa caucus, generally speaking, the progressive generally wins. Starting with 2016, the party got a little bit smarter, and we had coin tosses to make Hillary Clinton the winner of the Iowa caucus.
Won 6 out of 6 coin tosses, CJ. I mean, that just totally normal.
A lot of luck there. So, I still get triggered anytime somebody says virtual tie, but the 2020 caucus same way. So my recommendation is just make sure that you're organizing in the rural spaces as well. As a more rural voter, I think that the main thing we need to do is engage people on issues. I mean, they don't care about personality. They don't care about, you can slap a pride sticker on your tank, but nobody wants to go to war either way. So it's just one of those things where, I think that we really need candidates to come and meet people where they are. We don't need you to pander to the racist white guy at the country store. Like, that's not the demographic that we need. Those folks are going to make the decision regardless of what messaging we have. And quite honestly, the Republicans, no matter who they are, no matter what race, top of the ticket to the bottom, they're going to call you a baby killing socialist commie no matter what you do. So you might as well just be yourself and be progressive, because that's where the future of the country is.
It's a very well stated point.
Yeah.
It is a state that has Iowa's a very interesting state because it has a very strong progressive streak, but it's also a state that produced Steve King. So knowing the juxtaposition that certain parts of the state has, what would you say was the big difference in terms of why Pete was able to do so well, and then ultimately what Bernie did and can ultimately capitalize on going forward? We've heard plenty of stories behind the scenes about how things were not run as well as they could have been, but from your perspective, why do you think Pete ultimately was able to garner that type of support? Was it just simply the establishment putting all their weight behind him type of situation? What do you see as being the case? and then ultimately, how we, get around that next time around.
I will say that Pete Buttigieg had a fantastic strategy. He was in every small little town all the time. I mean, I think he came to. I actually there was a fun little detour that we took where Pete showed up at the back of my church, and he was there when I was preaching the sermon one morning, and I was, it was my turn to lead worship, and I just came out and there's Pete Buttigieg sitting in the back row. And it's just one of those things where, he's just everywhere, man. And I think that's really important. And I think that's one of the reasons Pete resonated. I do think Pete resonated because he represented that, hey, we've checked another box and we get to feel good about ourselves. Now, I can say that I'm a gay man, and nobody else probably can say it. But I mean, to me, it's just Iowa Democrats do pride themselves on elevating folks. However, we do have a strange situation right now where we're not elevating and supporting our candidate for governor to the extent that we should be. Now, she just happens to be a Black woman, and all of a sudden the major donors aren't putting in any money. I just find it very interesting. Then Ross Smith, the other major candidate who was in the race, had to drop out because he couldn't raise any money, and he happened to be Black also. So I would say, the Iowa Democratic Party has some serious issues. It has some issues surrounding, it's very much a white liberal, neoliberal, upper middle class type scenario going on. So
we can relate. We're in Florida, so the head of our Democratic Party is actually a Republican.
Well,
so that's our life.
Well, if there is one person who we know pretty well that is running in your state that we think could, if she gets elected, could really do a lot of good and potentially build that momentum, is Kim Graham, who's running for Polk County attorney. Great lady, ran for the U.S. Senate, did pretty well, all things considered, when you think about how much money they threw into that race.
I like Kim.
Yep. And if she's able to get elected, I think that could be a huge turning point for progressives.
For sure. And I just want to say one note about Kimberly Graham. Kimberly was the first statewide candidate or official to, come and, stand with my campaign when I was running for state senate in 2020. And, it meant so much to have someone who was running a statewide race acknowledge that I was out here doing something. And, rather than only focusing on targeted races, she recognized the importance of progressive leadership. And I'm just so impressed and so grateful for her. And I'm really excited for the people of Polk County. I wish I could vote for her, but I don't live in Polk County. But she is fantastic.
It's pretty amazing what you can do in politics when you don't have any strings attached to you. You know what I'm saying?
That is correct. That is correct.
Yeah. CJ, people can follow you at CJ for Iowa on Twitter. Is there anything else you'd like to plug before you go?
Actually, I would just say, just make sure if you get a chance, find some community organizations that are fighting the pipelines. Throw them a few bucks if you can. So if you just have a corporate Democrat in your district, throw some money to the folks who are fighting the pipelines.
Thank you.
I still believe we're going to win the day because I think that the issues are what we fight for, and we fight for them without having to be paid to fight for them. And so we have to keep casting a wider net, building these relationships. You're in Iowa, we're in Florida, but in many ways we fight for the same things. Yeah. And we are very appreciative of all that you do, CJ. We hope to have another conversation with you.
Let us know if you run again for something, for sure.
Or just anything.
Well, yeah, I mean, for anything, yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, the next time I might be running for the exit, but you just never know. All right, well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on. It was nice to meet you.
Thank you, CJ. Have a wonderful evening. So needless to say,
so lovely.
And you can tell, and I think you can tell pretty easily that he's a regular guy, and he's just somebody who really cares about his community and wants to see them succeed. And that
it's
when
very
we talk
Midwestern values.
Yes. Well, that's what they say about Chicago, is that it's it's New York with Midwestern values. And so when we think about all of the problems that have existed, when we think about the disintegration of the Democratic Party, I think about the fact that it isn't the party of labor anymore, because it used to be it used to show very strongly in Iowa. In fact, I think since Reagan, I think Obama won Iowa in 2008, and I think Gore won Iowa in 2000, and that's it. It's basically become a red state, which is amazing.
And I would think, honestly, just from the rural aspect of it, that it would probably lean more libertarian.
Maybe so. I think what ends up happening, of course, is that when you have a party that isn't really responding to the needs, like right now, you know that the energy, especially on the left, is we've got to do something about the environment. And when you have your own state party step in and say, yeah, we're not doing anything about that, it's like, do you really blame people for being so?
No, but then again, this
it?
reminds me of how I was invited to be on the state platform committee, as you know, in Florida, and then they just never had a meeting, and it never happened, and then there was no platform committee. So it's just like there's a lot of people in a lot of positions, but at the end of the day, the head of our party is a Republican.
Well, we have to ask ourselves, how much of a hand does Big Brother have in what we are able to do, what we're not able to do?
I will preface this with this time. I do audiobooks. Everyone knows that I do audiobooks. So I was listening to this book, and my husband happened to be sitting next to me, and he was, I guess he was overhearing it. And he sits up and he looks at me and he goes, great, now I'm not going to sleep tonight. So there was definitely some, like the Big Brother stuff is definitely creepy. And I want to show you guys, this is the book.
Get it up there real close.
Okay, it's got glare. This is the book.
We have to invite him on every few months, but of course it always requires a book to be written.
Well, he has this whole series, The Hidden History of, and they're great. And what this one in particular reminded me very much of that documentary that what was it called here? The Social Dilemma. It talks a lot about that, but then it also is really good with the history as to, well, how did we get to this point?
Well, we're going to find out. He is the host of the Thom Hartmann Show. He is a best-selling author and one of the true progressive champions of our time. Thom Hartmann, always a pleasure. Welcome back to Generational Change.
Thank you both. It's great to be here with you again.
Hi. So I actually end up, when I do the audiobook, I basically kind of not read it twice, but I listen to it, but then I go back through the hard copy because I write notes. That's the one problem with the audiobook, is that or I'm reading along with it, and then I feel like I'm like, 5, and I'm like reading along with the audio. But this was particularly scary to me. Like, of all the ones, like not healthcare, not oligarchy, but this, because I feel like this is where we are the product, and it's really scary. So talk a little bit about how this became one of the topics for your Hidden History series. Like obviously it's necessary, but like what inspired this one particular one?
Well, it's a big topic right now. I mean, as we're learning more and more about many of the social media organizations and how much of our information they're accumulating, how they're using it, how they're exploiting it, how Facebook, for example, was manipulated essentially, although, they wrote the algorithm that allowed it. In the 2016 election, the whole campaign by that British company that also led to Brexit as well. But so I wanted to talk about privacy essentially, and I think most Americans don't understand the history at all. Don't understand the history of privacy in the United States, and so I really started the book with this very, very big picture of how do you have freedom when you've got a government that absolutely controls people's behavior and the channels of information. And I start out with 2 examples. The first is the attempt to create a theocracy in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, which is what caused Ben Franklin, when he was 17 years old, to leave and move to Pennsylvania. And the story of these 3 women that John Greenleaf Whittier wrote a poem about, who had defied the local church master, and he ordered them tied to the back of a cart in the winter with several feet of snow on the ground and dragged naked from town to town and whipped in each one of these towns. And I mean, he didn't even try to call them witches. It was just that, they were Quakers. They defied his religious authority. And then I went to the history of slavery and how, how awakening from, the idea of slavery was, Frederick Douglass. I mean, I was looking for the title of the book that he wrote, but it was one of his autobiographies, but he wrote several of them. But, Frederick Douglass talked about when he was a child and the slave master chastised his wife for teaching Douglass how to read, and how he suddenly realized if he could read and write, oh my God, he could break out of this prison, this Big Brother prison. And then I bring it up to the current moment of both government Big Brother, the George Orwell Big Brother, and corporate Big Brother. And the book kind of bifurcates along those lines in the second and third part of it.
Yeah, I thought it was great. And there's this one quote that you give from Orwell that is, who controls the past, control the future. Who controls the present, controls the past. Yep. And I think that that's so telling right now. And you mentioned it in reference to the fight about critical race theory. And I think that that's that's where we're seeing it very relevant right now, because the idea is we've already done such a bad job at really educating ourselves about our misdeeds in this country. And now that there's people that are wanting to specifically point out some of these things, you have this backlash against it. And you talk about how they're not really upset about critical race theory, right? That's not the main issue.
No, they don't want American history taught because, as you said, as George Orwell said, whoever controls history controls the future, and whoever controls the present right now, and this is the Republican Party in multiple states are going out of their way to control history, and thus control the future. America has some really, really bad stuff in its past, but we can't heal, we can't clean up our act, we can't move forward, we can't make it right if we don't acknowledge it. I mean, this is kind of therapy 101. It's even AA 101, right? I've never been through AA, so I don't remember the steps, but one of them is you go to people and you confess and you say, I'm sorry I did this to you, will you please forgive me? We need to do this as a nation. And instead, the Republican responses to it, a party that is now pretty unabashedly the party of white male power, has said, no, we don't even want to have a conversation about that. We like things the way they are, white men in charge.
I think that's a really good point. One of the things that we've talked about here in Florida in particular, recently when you had this abortion bill, everyone points the finger at DeSantis, but I try to remind people that it's State Senator Dennis Baxley, and all you have to do is take one good look at the guy as well as his record and understand that this is the good old boy club leader, if you will, type person that really tends to fly under the radar because they're not seeking out the spotlight. But they are the ones that are doing everything within their capacity to keep this country from moving forward the way that it needs to. And in its haste, continues to prevent, people from living not just their truths, but, being able to reach their potential as people. We have seen this in many different ways, but I think as you talk about, Big Brother's objective has always been to keep a select few people in firm control of everything for as long as possible, no matter how much technology advances, no matter how much people become more self-aware. That's why you're seeing now they're like trying to ban books again. I mean, I would imagine from your perspective, it's, considering how much you've seen in your lifetime, it's pretty amazing that we're still
talking about book banning
with this type of stuff.
Well, and and to your point, John, there's been a shift. It used to be that Republicans, even if they didn't like it, embraced elections, embraced the idea that America is a democratic republic and the foundation of democracy is that the public gets to say who's in charge. And they're no longer embracing that. I mean, they've literally passed laws in a half a dozen states saying that if they don't like the way the election turns out, they can change the results. Or if they don't like who the voters are, they can prevent them from voting. Or if they didn't like the electorate that's coming up, they can prevent them from even registering to vote. Or if they think that there's too many Democrats in a particular place. I mean, the Supreme Court took this up 2 years ago with regard to Ohio. Ohio was the Secretary of State's office was sending postcards into largely black neighborhoods in large cities in Ohio saying, send this card back or you'll be removed from the voting rolls. The postcards were designed to look like spam. They look like something from your local supermarket. Nobody took them seriously. And hundreds of thousands of people got removed from the voting rolls, almost all of them black. And this went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, well, you can't prove that this is about race. It was really about politics. They were doing this in neighborhoods that were largely Democratic leaning. And politics is not a category that's protected. Being a Democrat is not a protected minority. So it's just fine, Ohio, go ahead and do it. And guess what? You got 20 states doing that right now as we speak. I mean, you're going to probably see 20 million people purged off the voting rolls between last year and November of this year.
This is why we say, people, it's very important who the Secretary of State is in some of these places. And this is where people don't realize that there's a whole bunch of underbelly, unsexy positions like that really matter. And nobody paid attention for so many years. And especially in Florida, like really the Republicans just really infiltrated from the ground up. And the Democrats just really have not had a hold on local politics, on party politics, on getting into the electoral process at the same level that the Republicans have. They just haven't, because that's the only way we have basically a minority opinion dictating everything that's going on in this country.
We're speaking with Thom Hartmann, author of The Hidden History of Big Brother in America. Thom, I think a great point to be made, and obviously we know about the issues with the Democratic Party, obviously being corporate captured by Wall Street and whatnot. But if there's one thing that's distinctly different between the two parties is that the Republicans have a bottom-up approach, whereas the Democrats have a top-down approach. And that is something that, regardless of where you want to fight politically, having a bottom-up approach is the only way this is going to change. You can't be looking for that golden goose at the top and just assuming that, oh yeah, we're just going to ride their coattails. It's how a buffoon like George W. Bush becomes president, because there's no way a guy like that could ever carry the party's weight. But because everything is a bottom-up approach, that's how the GOP is able to do it. I think the progressive side of politics really needs to start employing that method. How do you see that?
I absolutely agree. Back in 2008, going into that election, there was a group out of the Northeast, I believe, that had significant billionaire funding. They've got Concord in their name. It's not Concord Coalition. It's Concord something else. But you can find them on YouTube right now. And they started distributing CDs, and the videos are also on YouTube. They're still there, or at least they were a year ago or so when I was playing them on a radio. And this guy, very nice, reasonable guy, kind of middle-class, middle-aged guy, he's looking into the camera and he's going, do you know who the most powerful political force in America is? Who the most powerful person in politics is? It's not the president. It's not a member of Congress or the Senate. It's the precinct committee chair and the precinct committeeman or committee person, depending on the state you're in. They not only write the platform for the party, they decide who are going to be the primary candidates. They can advance primary candidates. Primary candidates have to go through them. So, and his whole pitch was, if you watching this right now will volunteer to be a precinct committee person, you will be able to make sure that in the primary coming up, of the 4 or 5 candidates on the Republican side who are going to be competing, the majority of them are on our side. So the odds are that we're going to get one of these, right-wing wackadoodles in here. I mean, that's obviously not the language he used. And I played this on the air in 2008. I played it in 2009. I have played the clips from those videos probably 100 times in the last 12, 14 years, however long it's been. And it's absolutely what Democrats need to do. And it's something that the party should have been throwing money into way back in the day. And, instead they just, run ads when the campaigns come along. And, just like the same thing. I mean, in 2005, Randy Rhoads and me and I forget who all was there. I think maybe Sam Cedar was there. We went to Washington, D.C. when we were all on Air America. And Bernie Sanders put together this little meeting with a bunch of senators and a bunch of congressmen, all progressives. And our pitch was, you need to build out a media network. You need to, we're on 56 radio stations right now with Air America, but Air America is really shaky. And you've got 1,500 right-wing radio stations. You need to be building this out. And the next time we take the White House, you need to be doing radio rows on the White House lawn, like George W. Bush was doing every single year during the 8 years of his presidency. And one of the senators who was there, who later ran for president, and lost, sadly, got up and said, this all sounds really nice, but we really, as a party, should not be involving ourselves in the free market. That's the free market. That's the competitive market. Just let that work itself out. We can go on your show. We can be nice to you. We can support you. But it's not the job of the Democratic Party to help or even get involved with building out, and I said, all we're asking is that you put this on the radar screen of your donors. I mean, Clear Channel, when they went bankrupt, the company sold for $1 billion. There's got to be somebody on the left who would like to make $1 billion business investment that'll actually produce a profit if it's well run.
Mark Cuban.
Yeah, well,
looking at you, Mark Cuban. He's on my radar. I'm just saying.
Okay, and it's like, we were banging our head, and Bernie was there going, yeah, do this, because he was on my show every Friday for 11 years. He knew the impact of being on radio, but it's frustrating.
It's very frustrating, and we've talked a lot about how beneficial it would be for the independent, non-corporate people on the left that are doing media or anything to have some sort of network. And I do remember Air America. I actually called in and spoke with Ed Schultz once on Air America, and it was really cool. I remember I had to pull over because I couldn't believe I actually got through.
Miss that guy.
Ed was a good guy.
He was great.
A little bombastic, but a good guy.
That's for sure. And so when it relates to, Big Brother, I mean, obviously we saw all the things that transpired during the Cold War. Who knows if it ever really ended? We're seeing a very dangerous situation happening right now. We know that ginning up interest for war is a very profitable approach to foreign policy in the United States. How do you see Big Brother playing a role right now at a time where I think things are in a very, very bad way?
It's very tenuous right now.
Yeah. I think that this is significantly and a great question from John, but also Jen, your comments I think are spot on. That this is both consequentially and I'm missing a word here, but this is quite different from Iraq and Afghanistan. Iraq and Afghanistan were huge profit opportunities for the military-industrial complex. This war in Ukraine, not so much. You've got the whole world throwing weapons into the region, but even if we were to arm the Ukrainians, it would be a drop in the bucket, and it's not going to last for 20 years and help them all build a brand new mansion, or a new servants' quarters for their existing mansion. I'm not that cynical. I'm not seeing the military-industrial complex as much as they love every war that comes along. I'm not seeing them driving this train like we saw in 2003 and frankly in 2002 with Afghanistan. I mean, there was no reason for George Bush to go into Afghanistan. Mullah Omar, who ran the country, offered to arrest Osama bin Laden. He just said, I won't turn him over to America. I'll turn him over to any third country for trial. And Bush said, no, I'd rather have a war because war presidents get reelected. And, it's like, really? That was, there was clearly a lot of energy for that war coming out of the military-industrial complex and frankly, coming out of the media. And the media loves wars for the same reason, that they love anything that bleeds. It always leads. I mean, as the old saying goes from media. But I think this is different. I think that, this is not something that we were all planning on. In fact, it appears that it was only in January that the Russians put together their plans to take down Ukraine. And I'm just genuinely horrified by it.
I just don't know what his end game is. Like, this is what, regardless of what you think about Putin politically, he's not a moron. He's not stupid. So where is this going? You know what I mean? And us, being that they're not NATO, I mean,
I think this is very, NATO driven, but I also think that the only way this is going to end in, some form of a civil conclusion is going to be that all parties, especially Putin, have to save face. It's the only way.
But how does that happen?
Yeah, well, that is the big question.
I don't know. I mean, but I said this on the air yesterday. In fact, I was talking with a professor of psychiatry, Justin Frank from George Washington University, and an old friend of mine, Armin Lehman. We worked together for 2 decades all over the world, and I knew he was German, but I didn't know his story. And Armin after we all had retired, as it were, Armin came to me with a manuscript and he said, I'd like to tell the story of my life. And I read this and it was like, he was the 16-year-old German soldier who handed Hitler the news the war was over and who stood outside Hitler's door as he committed suicide. And now there's been a book, 2 books about it and a movie about him and all this and he's passed away now. He died about a decade ago. But Armin told me that, Hitler, blamed the German people. He was happy about the destruction of Berlin in his last days. He was like, kill them all. They let me down. And so I asked Dr. Frank, I said, this is like murder-suicide. We had one of these in Oregon just a couple of days ago. A husband, they got into a fight. He killed his wife and then he killed himself. Well, he did that husband, and for that matter, Hitler, didn't have a button they could push to end all life on Earth. Is it possible that, Putin could go that far? Is he that deranged? And Dr. Frank's comment was to the effect of, we have to be careful that this guy isn't humiliated. Let him live to fight another battle, as it were, and then let the world, organize and maybe hold a trial or whatever. I think this has politically destroyed him. I don't think he's going to be president of Russia 2 years from now, probably not a year from now.
Well, I know that economically they're like crumbling over there. And so what I'm wondering is this a distraction on there? And like, we see it all the time. Like, we live Wag the Dog. We wrote Wag the Dog in this country. So it's kind of like, I wonder if this is what basically is going on, because economically they're a mess and he's not looking good. So that's the kind of thing that would inspire some sort of military action.
He went into Syria and just bombed the crap out of Aleppo. Leveled entire neighborhoods, but just it killed thousands, maybe tens or even hundreds of thousands of civilians. Nobody really knows. And parts of Damascus. And other than the explosion of Syrian refugees trying to get into Southern Europe, the rest of the world was kind of because we didn't see it happening.
Yeah.
And then when the Chechen region of Russia tried to break away and declare their independence, he went in and he bombed the crap out of Grozny and killed tens or hundreds of thousands of people. This is a fellow who has no problem killing people, no problem at all with that. But neither of those 2 wars were fought in cities where everybody had a cell phone and there was a robust Wi-Fi and cell phone infrastructure. This is and neither one of them was, arguably part of Western Europe. This is the first TikTok war. This is the first war that we're watching in real time, and we're hearing the stories of actual people, average people who are talking about, my house is on fire. I can't find my baby. My husband had to go off, and, my grandmother is making Molotov cocktails. This is a brand new thing. My rant today over at HartmannReport.com was about how this is a hinge point in history. I think this is going to be like World War II, the Civil War, and the American Revolution. I really think that nothing's going to be the same after this for the United States, for Russia, for democracies around the world, and frankly, for wannabe autocracies. We even have now, and I thought he was a lost cause. We've got Viktor Orban now on our side. It's these guys who have had kind of gone to the dark side, and now all of a sudden they're like, okay, we'll defend democracy. We'll see.
We're speaking with Thom Hartmann, author of The Hidden History of Big Brother in America. And forgive me for having to correct you. My name is Peter. John is our former producer.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. And
we figured you thought that was,
no, it's all good. But something
I got an email that said John on it, and so I thought that was you. I'm sorry.
You know what? It's probably an old thread that I didn't update.
Yeah.
Okay, that's my fault. I apologize. So it's my fault for that.
Now I know why you look surprised when I called you that. I'm so
no. Well, listen, we're both Tauruses. You're May 7th. I'm May 6th. So we
14.
So we're all
May 6th is my producer Sean's birthday too.
It's a great George Clooney too. So we've got a lot of good people associated with
George.
With the Taurus. Yes,
indeed.
I think this is a very good segue to something that never really got talked about during Trump's presidency, and there really isn't much that I can defend Trump on. But one thing that we all noticed during that time was that everyone was opportunistic, regarding.
Yeah, I didn't do it, right, Sean?
Of course you did. Thanks a lot, Sean.
Sorry. sorry.
But one thing that I think that goes without saying, and whether it's John Brennan or Max Boot, we can list all the names. There was a rehabilitation of whether it was CIA spooks or anybody that would be considered part of Big Brother that were considered the good guys. And their entire reputation, the CIA's reputation, was basically rehabilitated.
When was this?
During the Trump years?
Nothing was rehabilitated. To who?
Well,
not to me.
Well, not to you, but you're an outlier. But I think that like I remember when Bill Maher had John Brennan on, and I'm just thinking, what are you doing? Like, at what point do you draw the line saying, yeah, Trump's bad, but this is even worse?
But W's now sharing candy with Michelle Obama.
Yeah,
so it's all good.
That makes it okay.
It's all good.
That makes it okay. So from your perspective, how much of a hand do you think Big Brother had in this whole rehabilitation of, frankly, these war criminals?
Yeah.
Yeah. But then they are war criminals, and they need to be identified as war criminals. The guys who lied us into these two wars. I mean, they're as bad as the people who lied us into Vietnam. And this is, goes back to that Orwell quote, Jen, that you started with.
Yeah.
This is an attempt to rewrite history, and a naked attempt to do that. And we shouldn't allow it. We shouldn't let them get away with it. But hey, I'm seeing these guys all over the place. I don't know what to do about it beyond pointing it out as often as I can. I would love to see a war crimes trial for George W. Bush and Dick Cheney.
Right? Was it? I just saw, and I cannot remember whose show I was watching that showed a clip of it. It might have been Kyle, about Condoleezza Rice going on and chastising about starting an offensive war in a country that didn't attack you.
This was on Fox News, mind you.
Right. And when I'm watching her talk about, like, I don't understand how she doesn't catch on fire. Like how the hypocrisy is suffocating.
Yeah. Yeah, it truly is. I don't know what I can add to that other than agreeing.
When you're getting paid the way that they're getting paid, and I did a little pontificating with Pete episode before we went live around 8:00. I did this a little bit earlier. And I just thought, I know a lot of people don't like Marjorie Taylor Greene, and rightfully so, but she represents a plus 28 R district. And the fact that there is so much of the Democratic consultant class, because that's really what it is.
They're
that just, they're all like trying, oh yeah, this is the race. We got to get behind this. And I'm thinking, this is not a winnable race. And yet you're putting so much money behind it. There are so many good non-corporate candidates running all over the country that could use this help, and they're not getting any of it.
And specifically in Georgia. And in Georgia, friend of the show, Michael Owens, he's a progressive.
Running for Secretary of State.
Running as Secretary of State in Georgia. That's the kind of people they need to be getting behind, not somebody in a plus 28 grade.
Those millions of dollars that those candidates are getting. I mean, imagine what that could do, especially because I think Georgia, despite the fact it's obviously looking like a red wave year, Georgia is one of those states that could buck the trend.
Yeah.
And when you have a lot of good candidates, whether you obviously have Senator Warnock at the top along with Stacey Abrams, and then somebody, of course, like Michael Owens, who is a friend, I think that opportunity is there. But if you're putting money where it's not going to be effective, I really have to question what the motives are of some of the people. And that's this whole thing about, and again, I think this does get back to Big Brother and this idea of we're going to point people in this direction over here.
Well, that they're hurting sheep. They're hurting sheep is what they're doing. And she's a horrible excuse for a human being. So I can understand the incentive, but put your money where it can be useful, don't you think?
Yeah, the process is called manufacturing consensus in this larger issue. But the Democratic Party has been suffering, in my opinion, for the better part of 30 years from and I think it dates back to the Clintons' embrace of neoliberalism, from the idea that they have to have consultants. They have to bring in these outside corporate folks who can tell them how to do things and tell them how to run campaigns. And those folks, most of their payment comes as a percentage of the media that they place. So, they make a whole hell of a lot more money if they buy $20 million in TV advertising in Georgia than if they buy $20,000 worth of Facebook ads that might be twice as effective. and so it's or do a whole lot of door knocking and organizing, the Stacey Abrams kind of stuff. I mean, Stacey Abrams just cut through that, right? And there are some Democrats who totally get this, and they're ignoring the consultants, and they're running campaigns, the old-fashioned way. But the old-fashioned way isn't profitable for a media consultant, and it's unfortunate.
It is. It's unfortunate. And we are actually starting a little business venture of our own where we're going to be doing that for grassroots campaigns on sliding scale rates and trying to help people. So technically consultants, but definitely working as local.
I think it's a dirty word. I think we need a better.
I know. Well, I say campaign strategies. We're
strategist is kind of a better word.
Yeah, but we're like, if a campaign's making money and they can afford to pay, great. And if it's somebody running for town council and they need help, then we'll help, So I think that we just need to sort of adapt to this world that is already out there and just do it from a grassroots perspective. We also started a PAC. Cool. So it's kind of like fighting fire with fire. And there's just certain things that we're just going to have to do in order to compete on a lot of these races that we cannot do on small dollar donations. It's just not feasible in most statewide races to do a small dollar donation race.
Well, again, I still think that you got to, obviously, it's all about staying away from corporate special interest money, which is obviously the goal. The other thing that we've noticed, Tom, as I'm sure you have, is there is a very, very big nihilistic movement on the left right now. It's online, but how that can really muddy the waters in terms of people's interests in being involved in electoral politics.
They just crap all over electoral politics. And they're like, if somebody's running as a Democrat, then they're just gonna, they won't support anybody running as a Democrat, even though there really aren't viable third-party options.
But with that said, what we do have is, getting back to that whole bottom-up approach, you've got three very important elected bodies of government that do not require you to be in a political party: city council, county commission, and school board. And those are very important positions everywhere. And the fact that people are, trying to chase the brass ring, the sexy spot, the truth is, if you really want to be involved and want to help and really make that difference, this is something, as you alluded to, the GOP really emphasizes. The precinct committee captain is much more valuable to the party than the actual elected representative, because they understand, and maybe it's a militaristic thing because the military is much more with the GOP than it is with the Democratic Party. Maybe that is that bottom-up approach that really works for them. And I'm thinking, if you are in politics, but you don't like the Democratic Party, there are ways to elect non-corporate progressives to office without actually having to run in the Democratic Party. I would think emphasizing that could really generate a lot of interest if that became more of the focus. And frankly, it's probably infinitely more important, especially nowadays.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And this effort, the bottom-up effort in the GOP has been led by, in large part, in my opinion, I wrote about this in my book on the war on voting. Led by the Koch network. The Koch brothers have pulled together. They have helped create in every single state a state policy network, a think tank. They support local candidates from the grassroots up. They've got a lot of networking opportunities and activities going on in states all over the place. And and again, the Democrats don't have anything like that, but the Democrats don't have, a handful or larger. I guess there's about 100, billionaires and very, very rich people involved in that network, who are willing to spend that kind of money, which is unfortunate. But, hey, the Republican Party is about getting rich. It always has been. And the Republican Party, since the failure of Reconstruction, the Republican Party has been the party of wealthy, mostly white men, and big corporations. And there was a little blip there with Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft, but other than that, that's been their song and dance consistently. And so that's where the money is. It's the old Willie Sutton thing. Why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. Well, why do Republicans pour money into politics? Because that will change the rules of the game so that they can make more money. It's a scam. It's a rigged routine. It's wrong, but and the Supreme Court has made it far, far worse with things like Citizens United and Buckley and Bellotti, these three major Supreme Court decisions. And then on top of that, you look at they're gutting the Civil Rights Act, or the Voting Rights Act rather, and you look at they're saying that gerrymandering is just fine, and purging voting rolls is just fine. I mean, the Supreme Court has done so much damage to this country. They've moved us so rapidly to the right and toward oligarchy and autocracy, and they're continuing to. I mean, they're getting ready to blow up the EPA's ability to regulate carbon, for example. I mean, that's the next on their agenda, and they're going to do it. They're going to say, sorry, if the EPA if you want the EPA to have the right to regulate carbon, that doesn't fall under this general rubric of protecting the public and protecting the environment. You've got to have legislation that specifically says EPA regulate carbon, and and of course that'll never get through Congress now. So
they've done a very good job over the past 20 years, really stacking the courts, and in a lot of cases the Dems rubber stamped a lot of it, and which was very frustrating. I am happy to see the new Supreme Court nominee is somebody that I believe is in the correct direction. But I have not read your hidden history on the Supreme Court. I do see that that's one of the ones you've done. And my idol is Thurgood Marshall. Yeah. And I remember when Kavanaugh was getting appointed, and I was thinking, God, we have really fallen very far. We have fallen so far, and our bar is so low. And we have two of them now that I basically look at what are they doing there? How did they get there? They've never tried a case. And so I was happy to see that this appointee is somebody that looks worthy, which would be a step in the right direction as far as I'm concerned. But the Democrats were pretty complacent with a lot of these judicial picks.
I agree, although the biggest problem was, basically Trump becoming president in 2016 with a little help from Mr. Putin. And that, and Mitch McConnell holding back on Merrick Garland's placement on the court, who I was no liberal champion, but was not a crazy. And, he would have been another Breyer, I think, frankly. And Breyer is kind of very disappointing in a lot of ways. And I think Ketanji Brown Jackson is going to be a great member of the Supreme Court, assuming that she gets on. But still, she's going to be one of three. I mean, that's just really?
Yeah.
And instead, if Hillary Clinton had gotten the White House, we would have 6 progressives on the court and 3 conservatives. And America would suddenly become a very different place. And that power of the court is something that has been known to conservatives for a long, long time. It's why my old debating partner, Phyllis Schlafly, used to, or debating adversary, I guess, just pounded on this. She wrote a book about it. The Supreme Court. She was. I mean, and I'm talking about in the 60s, the 50s, the late 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. She was the Energizer Bunny about we've got to take over the Supreme Court. We've got to control the Supreme Court. To hell with all this electoral politics stuff. The only reason you have to worry about the White House and the Senate is because it takes the White House and the Senate to get somebody on the Supreme Court. And she just pounded on it and pounded on it and pounded on it until somebody took it seriously. And now they take it very seriously because they see how, for her, it started with Brown v. Board. That was the first outrage. And then Roe v. Wade was the thing that pushed it to the top, from her point of view. And we've got a hell of a lot of remediation to do. I mean, the Supreme Court has done so much damage. The Supreme Court, more than Ronald Reagan, gutted unions in the United States. The Supreme Court has played a major role in gutting education in the United States. The Supreme Court has, I could go on, like I said.
Yeah, no, it's very real, and it's upsetting to watch. And to me, that's something that I always I take that very seriously. The whole, I put them on a pedestal. That was sort of the one branch of government to me that was exceptional. Like, these are people that are supposed, your representatives, come on, anybody can do that. We all know that, right? They're like, these do not have to be rocket scientists and whatever. They're not. But the Supreme Court to me was sort of like this place of, those should be the most brilliant judicial minds in our country. Like, that's what that's supposed to be. And it's depressing. And what concerns me the most as far as Roe versus Wade is, as I'm sure you know, it's not a good decision. Like, in terms of its jurisprudence and how they reasoned it and where they found the penumbra of your right to privacy. And it's very weak. And people, and they know that on the right, they know that it will not take a lot to unravel it, because it really isn't a great decision. I mean, we agree with the outcome, but the decision was never strong. It was always kind of like hanging there. So
there's a whole chapter about that in my book on the Supreme Court. And what should have happened is, in 74, Congress should have passed a law saying, okay, we agree with the Supreme Court, we're going to put this into law. And it should have happened in 74, 75. It should have, every year since then. It should have. And, they tried doing it last week. And of course, it got shot down. In fact, Joe Manchin voted against it.
Well, I mean, because people don't realize, like, the Roe versus Wade really shouldn't even be a thing. Yeah. Like that. They were legislating on the bench. Right. Exactly. It shouldn't be a thing. And yet we need it. It's not ideal. It's definitely not one of the better decisions that have come out of the court. And yet we take it very seriously, and it's very important. And so that's kind of scary.
Yeah. And it's also an example of and I get into this in the book, an example of how the court really shouldn't be legislating. I mean, had the Supreme Court not ruled the way they did in Roe v. Wade, had they just never taken the case, birth control pills were legalized by the FDA in 1961. In 1965, the Supreme Court struck down laws that made it illegal for married people to have birth control in their home. In 1972, the Supreme Court struck down the law, and they were in states all over the country, that made it a crime for unmarried people to be in possession of birth control, including condoms. It was illegal as of 1970. Right. Most people have no idea about that.
Yeah.
So there was this radical social change that was happening from the bottom up in 72, 73, and states were starting to legalize abortion. New York had legalized it. There were several, half a dozen states that had legalized abortion by 1973. It was a movement. And if the Supreme Court had just stayed away from it, it would have organically spread across the country. Yes, we'd probably still have Louisiana being a place where you can't get an abortion. Yeah. But it wouldn't have produced this huge backlash. It wouldn't have animated the right wing. It wouldn't have handed the Republican Party and the Christo-fascists, Jerry Falwell, in 1980, when he was working on Reagan's campaign, 2 years after he started the moral majority. That was when they decided that they were going to go anti-abortion. Reagan had signed the most liberal abortion law in the entire country as governor of California back in the 70s. George Herbert Walker Bush and his wife were huge supporters of Planned Parenthood. Barbara, I've read that she was on the board. I've also read that she wasn't on the board, so I don't know which is true. But they were big supporters of this. All that changed in 1980 when the evangelical hustlers, Jerry Falwell, the evangelical grifters, and Pat Robertson, who had all been pro-choice in 1979. When they got together with the Bush-Reagan campaign, and they were looking for a big issue that they could put at the center of their campaign, and George W. Bush had been hired as a political consultant and the guy to connect the Reagan campaign to the evangelical community, and they all agreed, hey, abortion is it. It's starting to reach a critical mass. We'll push it over the top. This is going to be the new Republican thing. And none of that would have happened if Roe v. Wade hadn't happened. So,
I know when I say things like when I say that, people think I'm crazy. I'm like, nah, was it really the best way to go?
And it's like, somebody could take, 30 seconds out of this conversation and take it wildly out of context.
Yeah.
And make it sound like you and I are taking, the three of us are taking Phyllis Schlafly's position.
Right. Like we're anti-choice.
Yeah, exactly. And we're not. I mean, so anyway.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that is, the Democratic Party's greatest sin is that they got in bed with Wall Street, and the Republican Party's greatest sin is they got in bed with the evangelicals, and we are seeing it we're seeing it crystal clear today. We obviously have made progress over the past 5 years, not as much as we obviously need to make. But Bernie's 2 runs obviously has awoken sort of a sleeping giant of sorts. But as Jen likes to say, a lot of them are nomads running through the desert right now. They don't really know what to do. There's a lot
I say they're like deadheads when Jerry Garcia died and they didn't quite know what to do with themselves. And a bunch of them followed Fish. That was true. But the rest of them just sort of hung out in Colorado and set down roots.
Fish was okay, but they weren't the Grateful Dead.
Yeah. And so I think that it's kind of like with AOC being a good example. Like, I don't have any love for her performance art. I think it's ridiculous, but I do think that in terms of her ability to excite people on the ground, like she did for Jessica Cisneros and Greg Casar in Texas, it is pretty obvious that there is juice there. The question is, how exponential do you think it could get? And do you think, considering how, let's be honest, how weak Biden's presidency has been, we can clearly see DeSantis coming from Florida.
People.
Do you see?
Rick Scott is the dark horse nobody's paying attention to. I think he's going to be the Republican nominee in 2020.
Okay, let me explain to you how scary that is. Tom, you're freaking me out. This was scary enough, and now you're talking about Voldemort. Rick Scott is the worst. That's why when I say I don't hate DeSantis and people look at me like I'm nuts, I'm like, you don't understand. We had Rick Scott for 8 years. He's the most despicable of all of them.
You just call him Red Tide Rick.
Oh my God.
I mean, talk about the most devastating. I mean,
I would campaign for DeSantis before I would ever see Rick Scott.
And that's the one thing that's so interesting about DeSantis, because he's got so much of that Trump thing in him, and that's what people like about it. But the truth is, he's actually been very good for the Everglades in the state. When Rick Scott was governor, I mean, I can't imagine somebody like that. First of all, he's the richest man in Congress. You should see the lovely mansion that he has on the Gulf in Naples.
He should be in prison.
And that's all blood money, by the way. Medicare fraudster, 75 times.
His company committed the largest Medicare fraud in the history of the United States, and then he took that money and ran for governor. And throughout the 8 years that he was governor, he refused to expand Medicaid, and people like Charlene Dill died as a result of it.
Yes. And this is all, and again, this is
God, I'm scared, not him.
Yeah, it's the complete, he doesn't know, I don't
Anyone
think he has the personality for it.
He runs the Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee. He's the guy who is passing out tens of millions of dollars to other Republican senators. That is a stepping stone to the presidency in the GOP. And he just released his Contract on America, his 11-point plan. He's trying to pull a Newt Gingrich. It is, and the guy is fully bilingual. He's going to have a large chunk of the Hispanic vote.
He said that over and over again.
He speaks Spanish fluently, exceptionally well. And that's
don't underestimate that, people. It matters.
Yeah,
right. And we're finding that the Hispanic vote is shifting to the right because it's so Catholic because of abortion. And he's
that is an excellent point you just brought up, and I think it's a great closing topic to talk about, because as we know, the margin between Representative Cuellar and Jessica Cisneros is razor thin. But what was very telling in that race was how the border voters in places like Brownsville, they voted overwhelmingly for Cuellar. So that message of build the wall and things like that, people have to recognize where a lot of that Hispanic vote actually rests. And these types of wedge issues really drives a lot of that vote. And there's something about, it's like defund the police. It's like you have to know where the line is. Like we talk about, President Biden doesn't need to be telling the nation we need to fund the police. No, what you need to do is end qualified immunity. Because if you did that, you would basically make the police police the police. And all of the garbage that they allow these dirty cops to get away with, they are not going to give up their pension to protect a dirty cop. So if we were able to do something as basic as that.
But you know where qualified immunity came from? The Supreme Court invented it out of thin air.
What a surprise.
So I have a question for you, Tom. I need you to do one of these about labor.
Okay.
They're not, because I look back, I'm like, the hidden history of labor in America, and I thought is that something that I've seen? And I'm like, that would be really good.
That would be a fascinating book.
You'd have a lot to talk about with William Jennings Bryan and Eugene Debs, that's for sure.
Bernie's
and,
here, you know.
And you know, speaking of history, guys, if you really want to know where the whole Republican, every man, woman, and child for themselves, study up on Calvin Coolidge and what he did in the 1920s, and where the Republican Party really took this horrifically bad turn. And what's amazing, as you know, is that the Republican Party really took a hiatus in many ways in terms of that mindset between the 20s up until Reagan, because Eisenhower was an extremely progressive Republican overall. There's a lot of things that Nixon did during his presidency that were fairly progressive, whether it is the EPA. There's a number of things that were there, certainly bad as well. But that sort of every man, woman, and child for themselves mindset ultimately led to the Great Depression. Yeah. And I kind of feel like we're sitting in that moment right now where it's like all these things are happening at once.
Pull yourself up from your bootstraps, man.
I don't even know if that's
Coolidge was corrupt, but Warren Harding really set that up. When he ran for president in 1920, the top income tax rate at that time, a remnant of World War I, was 91%. And Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft had been busting up major corporations left and right. The trust busters, so they just busted up Standard Oil, among others. They broke a sugar trust. They broke a copper trust. They broke a match trust. Making matches actually was it had been, and so Harding had two campaign slogans. One was a return to normalcy, which was code for drop the tax rate, the top tax rate, back down to 25%, where it was before World War I, which he did after he got elected. And the other was less government in business, more business in government, which translates into deregulate and privatize, which he did. And that, like you say, that set up Coolidge's corruption and, giving away, basically selling off the government to his cronies. And then, Hoover was probably the only actually reasonable man of the three. Yeah. It's why FDR put him in his cabinet, or I'm not sure if he's in the cabinet, but gave him a major position, going forward. Hoover was just out of his depth. He just didn't know what to do with the Depression and was flailing around trying to hang on to this Republican ideology of free markets and non-intervention. And anyhow,
what do the conversation is going to start now because we're at the 2-year mark before the Iowa caucus. What do you foresee happening? Because I think that there is going to be a window of opportunity for a non-corporate candidate to potentially run in 24. I thought it was going to take until 28, but circumstances change every day. I think where we are right now, again, there's been 3 names that you may have heard of were floated in Politico: Marianne Williamson, Nina Turner, and Joe Sandberg. What do you ultimately see happening going forward in 24?
Yeah.
I doubt that Biden is going to run for re-election. He's going to be 80, and he's already getting kind of fragile. Look at how he walks. And I love Joe Biden. He's trying to do really good progressive stuff, and my sense of it is that Kamala Harris doesn't have the juice, doesn't have the base, and she doesn't have the momentum. Now that might change. And we'll have to see, particularly if something happens to Joe Biden and she becomes president, God forbid. But, I kept thinking last night with him, glad handing all these people. My God, this guy's going to walk out of there with COVID. But we'll see. Anyhow, I'm more. So I agree that I think 2024 there's probably going to be a really significant Democratic primary. And my guess is that the strongest candidate who might be able to carry that is Elizabeth Warren. She has the Bernie crowd. Bernie is also going to be, 80, 81 by then. She's younger. She's in her 60s, but she's younger. She's got a lot of energy. I don't think that an outsider, the people that you just named, I don't think any of them actually have a serious chance of becoming president. and I think Elizabeth Warren does. But we'll see.
I'm gonna disagree with you from this point. I think Elizabeth burned a lot of bridges in the Bernie movement in 2020, and we'll see how that plays out. I think you make a good point. I think if we're talking about an elected representative perspective, I would think naturally the inclination would be to lean towards her. But I do think that with everything that's going on right now, you just don't know. You don't know what to expect. You don't know where the momentum is going to come from. I think we can fairly say, I mean, listen, nothing is impossible, but fairly say that Bernie is not going to run for a third time, even though Reagan ran 3 times before he got it. I do think that this is sort of like you said, a very complex moment in history where we really don't know what's going to happen. But I agree with you that I think the likelihood that Biden, at the bare minimum, does not run for re-election is what's going to happen. I think we have a pretty good idea of what's coming on the GOP side.
Oh my God! Well, I'm not going to sleep well about that.
But I do think that there has to be this new bottom-up approach, especially with, look, if it works for the GOP, it can work for anybody. You just have to be willing to put in the work. And I think that changing of the mindset, especially in the progressive movement, is one of the ways that we can do that. Now, of course, Big Brother will always have a hand in the messaging, in convincing us that, it's like in the Democratic Party, Big Brother had a significant hand in obviously the messaging where convincing, the MSNBC, CNN watching moderates that progressives are dangerous people and that they're going to destroy the country and all that. We are at a point where we have to see how much we've learned over the last 5 years, especially for the people who have just gotten into politics over the last 5 years. This is sort of that evolution period. What comes next?
Yeah.
And that's going to be the interesting thing, because again, very, very interesting times we're living in, to say the least, Tom.
Yeah, as the old curse goes.
But for everybody, you guys should check this out. This one is really, I mean, you don't necessarily read it before bed because there's some stuff in it that but the technology.
You'd be looking under your bed.
I'm just saying. So like the Big Brother thing is not new, but the technology has it on steroids. And that's basically what it's right. So it's not new. It's just now the capabilities the tentacles are very, very far.
And if you have not seen the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, highly recommend you see it, because this pairs very well with the hidden history of Big Brother in America.
Yeah.
Because the way that our social media platforms are designed
is
to make you a drone. That's basically the way it's
make you an addict, really.
Yes. Yeah. It's like sugar or anything else, or tobacco.
There is. You're chasing a high, and addictive personalities, you can imagine what happens to them, Tom, being on, thinking about how people can actually be on a cell phone 8 to 10 hours a day.
I got off of social media a year ago. I can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
But what is the next one? What are you working on now?
I just sent to the editor. It's going to come back to me next week for, with a million little markups in it. The next book, it's called The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, How Reaganism Gutted America.
Oh.
And how the Democrats jumped on it too.
I was going to say, and then enter Bill Clinton, and oh my God, he can't help himself. He actually does a good Bill. But whenever you do Bill, I feel like I need to go take a shower.
Well, I just have to say I did pretty well under those years of neoliberalism. Made a lot of money. Would you like to hear about what we did during my presidency? I'll tell you what we did, Jen. It was really wonderful. Tom, great to see you.
Great to see you.
Great work, but we did NAFTA. We did normal trade.
Yeah, let's talk about NAFTA.
We don't have to talk about it. I just told you I did it.
I got to tell you though, I did a fundraiser for Congressman McGovern up in Washington State, and along with Bill Clinton. And this was when he released the audio tape of Newt Gingrich illegally conspiring over the telephone to a whole thing. And then Gingrich sued McGovern, and we were trying to raise money for his legal fund. And I went out on stage and I introduced Bill Clinton, and then Bill Clinton went out on stage and he introduced McGovern. And then during McGovern's speech, Bill Clinton and I were standing backstage, in the wings. I'd never met him before. And he just turns to me and says, well, tell me about you. And I felt like a 1,000-watt light had come on me. I have never in my life met anybody who had such charisma, who had such charm, who had such energy. Yep. This guy is probably the most brilliant politician of our generation. I mean, I
appreciate it. I've heard
everyone says that about him. Everyone says that about him.
Amazing.
How else was I able to pass the Telecom Act in '96? How else was I?
And we're so appreciative for that.
Oh, you should be very appreciative. I did a lot of wonderful things. How else could I have possibly passed the crime bill in '94? I mean, that was believe me, getting away with super predators. And then, of course, the most important one of all, I managed to repeal Glass-Steagall while I was being impeached. It was incredible.
While you were being impeached, yes, that was quite a gift of yours.
I mean, I'm Slick Willie.
You are very slick.
Tom, great to see you.
Go away. Go.
We're good, Peter.
He gets away with. Like I said, there are some people who literally get away with murder.
Well, he is very
and I can remember when I was with the head, when Terry Rizzo was the head of the Democratic Party in Florida, and I was in D.C. with her at an event. And she was talking about, just, oh my God, and the way he shook my hand and put the other hand on top of my hand. I don't need to hear that. It's like, okay, I understand he's charismatic, but he's an evil guy.
He was on Epstein's plane 26 times, people. 26 times.
But I'm so charming. You have to overlook it.
No, one time fine, 2 times maybe, 26 times you're part of the problem.
Well, as you know, the system unfortunately begets this sort of like, and we've always had this problem with politicians being treated like celebrities when they should just be treated like public servants, because that is their job and that's what they're supposed to be doing. And I'm hopeful that is the new evolution that we're trying to build. If we're going to follow Bernie's message, because you know this better than anybody, Tom, Bernie hated the spotlight. He did not want to be in it. That was not his motivation. And I think a lot of people can learn a lot. Because even when Bernie went on Stephen Colbert last night, it's like he goes on there to talk about issues.
Yeah.
He doesn't go on there to be a blowhard in any way and talk about, oh, well, guess what book I'm selling now? I didn't do that. I just went on to talk about the fact that Putin is a bad guy and we are trying to save the world from total annihilation.
Thank you.
So that's what he did. And I hope a lot of us can learn from it. And I hope a lot of you will go out there and buy this amazing book.
Yeah, you guys, it's a really good series. It is. It's a really good series. It's like, it's everything you would need to know. And it's concise and it's smart.
Mm-hmm. And we cannot thank you enough. We certainly hope that you will come on for a 4th time in the not too distant future. You are an absolute treasure to the progressive movement.
Yeah.
And we thank you for your continued work. Listen to the Thom Hartmann Show, guys. You learn quite a bit about the world that we inhabit and the way we can make it better. Tom, what can we say? We appreciate you, and we definitely look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Peter, Jen, Bill, thank you all.
Thanks, Tom.
Pleasure, my friend. Have a great night. Thank you. Bye-bye.
He's lovely.
He's the man.
I love Tom.
And so...
And there is definitely that Dem streak that is, where, and look, to some extent, I do think that's generational.
It is.
And,
Tom is going to be... Tom is 70. So he is
one of the good guys, people. Yes. He really is. He's
Tom
one of the good guys.
And listen, we both, obviously, if we're talking about presidential candidates, the 3 candidates that I mentioned are definitely preferential to Elizabeth Warren. It is what it is, but there are people...
And that's fine. And I think that this is where we need to recognize that allies are not all identical to us.
No, absolutely
We have allies that don't agree with us on everything, and maybe they're not as far left as we would like them to be, but they're allies nonetheless. Yeah. And Thom Hartmann is definitely an ally.
1,000%.
He is a net positive for all of these things.
Listen, I don't agree with his take when it comes to, Putin helped Trump win the election. It's like, listen, and if that's what he believes in, that's fine. And you can't get mired down in a conversation about, well, that's not who cares? Because
at the end of the day, Thom Hartmann believes in justice for workers and healthcare for everybody, and he believes in getting money out of
climate
politics.
Change is real and it has to be dealt with, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is the essence of what we do to actually bring these people together.
Exactly, Paul.
Got it, Paul. Nailed it.
And the truth is that we need people like that are the bridge between the older generation and any sort of progress whatsoever, because he does focus on policies.
100%. And if any of those people, whether it be Marianne or Nina or Sandberg, run for president, Thom may support Elizabeth Warren, but he's not the guy who's going to be telling people, don't vote for those people.
And not only that, but he'll platform them fairly.
100%. And that is an old school, that is a Kennedy Nixon way of doing politics.
You know what, how I think of him? He reminds me of, like, he's just much more statesman-like. And he's much more, he's old
it
school.
Kind of does make you wonder. It does make you wonder to some degree why he never ran for office, because Thom does have that
he's
sort
kind of a journalist person, and I think that his strength, and certainly, you know, he would be the better person to ask. His strength is his ability to come at it from the outside and shine light on it. And if that's what that's what his sort of contribution is. And he's quite good at it, people.
Yes.
And I really would like him to do a hidden history of labor, because it would be awesome.
I think you just did. Well, he is going to have you write the foreword if he ends up writing that book.
I'd be so happy to do that.
Now that would be actually do. And frankly, that's one of the most important ones, because the labor, as we've always said, the progressive movement success rests within the labor movement, 100%. And anybody out there who thinks that you can not include Trump supporters in the labor movement, you've already lost.
Yeah.
You've already lost.
You cannot let your social biases change what we need to do for our economic justice.
And one thing we've always tried to explain is that there are always going to be bigots in society.
Yes.
It does not matter how much you try to chastise them. And quite frankly, the harder you push them is the more they're going to dig in their heels and try to get other people to join them. It's why you have literal psychopaths like Nick Fuentes who have success, which is amazing. And that guy doesn't hide it at all. I mean, he is not only a white nationalist, he's an incel white nationalist. Like, he's the kind of guy who, with all due respect, Nick, could be the next Nicholas Cruz. Hate saying that, but those are the kinds of people that end up picking up an AR-15.
I'd have to ask you something. Why would anybody brag about being an incel? Like, to me, when I think of incel, it was like the guys from the AV club that couldn't get laid but wished they could get laid.
Well, that's what,
and they drew comic books with big boobied women. And
yes,
stuff.
It's amazing that you say that, because that's how a lot of the comic book designers are. There are guys like that, but they find an outlet. They find an outlet. They make some money, and then they can actually pay to have the women do that to them. So I'm just saying.
Oh.
But we are in a situation, because things are so bad, that a lot of these, it's not just grifters, it's these opportunists, it's these grandstanders that do these things because they love the attention and because people eat it up.
So before we get into this, and I did say we will end this show on a comical note. And this is definitely not anything I would ever do in front of Thom Hartmann.
Tom's a good Christian. He can't stand for this.
He wouldn't want to do this. So guys,
definitely not.
Okay. So this is not somebody who is a new member to the club by any stretch, but since the club started sort of, fairly recently. So I would like to welcome Congresswoman Lauren Boebert into the Cunt Club. And look, I did not watch the State of the Union, because I never watch the State of the Union, because there's no point. All it is platitudes, sandwiches, and cheerleaders, and then critics.
Just get the highlights.
I don't even need the highlights, because everything doesn't matter what he says. It matters what he does. That's the problem. So
actions
I don't care
speak louder than words.
Yeah, I don't care about the State of the Union. However, it was brought to my attention that this piece of work was heckling the president. And not that I have a problem with heckling. I really don't. But she's such a moron. So apparently her big thing was about the service people that died in the evacuation of the troops from Afghanistan. Okay. This is the problem with that. While that is horrible, and I am totally sad that anybody died anywhere having to do with Afghanistan. But to point that out specifically when we were in a country killing innocent people for 20 years, and then to criticize that particular thing is just screaming of somebody that needs education. So welcome.
Or an ass kicking.
Well, okay. I've always thought that her and Marjorie Taylor Greene both needed to get their asses kicked at a younger age. But this woman And you could bring all the guns you want to the party, sweetheart. This is what my friend Ashley would say from law school. Be like, bless her heart. Like, just because, just pathetic. You are pathetic. But anyway, as a congresswoman in urgent need of teaching, welcome to the Cunt Club, Lauren Boebert.
Now, Lauren Boebert represents a plus. Doug, help me out here. I think Boebert's district is a +5R. It's reasonable. It's not out of the realm of a legitimate fight.
No, it's within the realm of possibility.
Correct.
And if you had somebody that, I don't know, maybe wasn't a moron. And by the way, in a state like Colorado, you do tend to get a very libertarian red.
Yes.
It's not, these are people that hands down legalized marijuana. Like, this is not a very conservative place as a red state. Just isn't.
Well, again, it's a different type of conservative, just like it's a different type of conservative in states like Utah.
Yes.
Because and states like Wyoming, because what's interesting about those types of states, see, everybody assumes that all the GOP is the same. It's not true.
Well, just like we know all Democrats are not the same.
That is correct. And so when you're talking about the Western states, they tend to do pretty well economically. Wyoming, Utah,
right, they're
surplus
not Mississippi
states.
And
it's not the deep South states, which is So this is a very interesting situation here where Boebert may be getting a little too big for her britches in terms of her actual electoral security, unlike somebody like a Marjorie Taylor Greene.
She so needs an ass kicking.
And so the idea that she thinks that she's going to last forever in electoral politics is not true. Now, somebody like Madison Cawthorn would be a great example of somebody who is only there because he's in a super gerrymandered district, because anybody who is a representative like him who represents Asheville makes absolutely no sense. But if you saw the way his district is drawn, you would understand.
My Asheville people do not like him.
I'm sure they don't. I don't know who really would like somebody like that. But then again, that's the thing about the GOP. They want you to speak a certain language, support certain issues, and that's it. They really don't. I mean, do personalities matter? Yeah, to some degree, but for the most part,
they just get in line.
They just get in line.
They do.
And that's the way it goes.
But this woman, oh my God.
So
she's the one who had that picture with her with all her kids, and they were all packing guns, right? Like she had hers and her little kids.
And I
had
think
guns,
Thomas Massey also did a picture like that. And Thomas Massey, to his credit, usually is, in terms of a libertarian voter, is usually not the worst. Unfortunately, when they you're putting guns in kids' hands.
Here's my thing with that, and I am by no means a gun warrior. Okay, I support the Second Amendment. I grew up in a household with guns. I learned how to shoot a gun when I was 13. I don't have a problem with guns. However, I think that if you are going to pose with guns, I would just want people to pause for 1 minute and think, what else do you have that you would shoot this picture with like that? Would you go get like a bunch of bottles of booze and have your kids holding booze and take a picture? Like, would you do it with, I don't know, like for me, I collect penguins. Would I like hold penguins like in different places? Like, why do people feel the need to do that? And I think it's really very telling. It's very overcompensating, because clearly we know that you're a Second Amendment enthusiast. But do you do that to intimidate? Do you think it makes you look cool? Is that sort of like people that would, post pictures of themselves smoking and drinking when they weren't of age because they thought it made them look cool? It's just pathetic. And again, I have no problem with guns.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is an issue that is what we call a wedge issue in politics. And a lot of people end up getting caught up in that type of thing as a means to why they should support you versus not. The reasons that we really need support for any candidates these days is whether they're bought and paid for by corporate special interests first and foremost. And then, of course, if they're fighting for universal health care, the environment, living wage, ending the wars, sure know that they're loving that, what's going on right now. Criminal justice reform. There are so many things that are of much more importance than getting marred down in wedge issues. And
there's so much fun for people.
Yeah, it is. That's what
trans
sells.
issue is a problem, though. What's going on right now?
It is
that new law that just.
And like I said, one of the good things that Biden did say last night is get the Equality Act to my desk, because like the PRO Act, what that will do is it will trump the Don't Say Gay bill here in Florida. And that's a much easier thing to pass because it isn't having as much economic
There is
ramifications.
now, and why am I not thinking of what state it is, guys? There's the new rule where if you support a transgender, like if you support a child that's transgender, that you could have your kid taken away from you.
I think that's Texas.
People.
Yeah.
This is getting to like, and again, it is a wedge issue. And I know that it's like one of those things that it sounds worse than that actually may ever be applied in theory. Like that's one of those things, but man, we've gone to a dark place where now if you are a teacher or a counselor and you are supportive of a child that is going through transition, you could be criminally liable. Like people just, we've gone
I just
mad.
don't understand. And again, this is the reason why libertarians really need to ask themselves, how much, do you want to, and I'm not saying that you should just go vote for Democrats. What I am saying is that the Republican Party doesn't have non-corporate candidates running in their party the way that
we'd be happy
Democrats
to support
do.
them if they did.
Libertarians truly believe in the Constitution and specifically the separation of church and state. And yet, the Republican Party has been completely co-opted by the evangelicals, and they do not believe in the separation of church and state. They believe in a theocracy, and that is a big problem. There is a reason why Ted M. Effer Cruz won the Iowa caucus in 2016 because he embraced that stuff.
He's so gross.
He is gross.
Oh, God, he's the worst. He's the worst. He was the only person on the Republican stage during the debate when was that? Was it 16, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That I thought to myself, if he's the nominee, I would vote for Hillary.
Yeah.
That was the one person that I thought, I could almost feel the bile coming up just even thinking about it. Like that somebody could make me, people, you have no idea how much I loathe Hillary Clinton. Like
not as much as Rick Scott.
Well,
if you want to know if you want to know who the one politician who is worse than Debbie Wasserman Schultz in the state of Florida is, Rick Scott. And
he's bad.
And
he's evil.
It's not.
He's Voldemort. He's evil. And to me, DeSantis isn't even in the same category. That's why it's hard to hate DeSantis.
Yeah, and I think Debbie is evil, but I don't think Debbie's not as powerful as Rick Scott. She doesn't have the money that
she's
he
not
has.
as smart as
She's
Rick
not
Scott
smart
either.
Rick Scott is a very smart.
That's the scary thing.
Yeah.
He is Voldemort.
I have observed the way he's campaigned for a decade, and I can assure you, he knows what he's doing.
And yet I also think so does Ron DeSantis.
Yes,
I think Ron DeSantis has proven to be an extremely capable politician, especially considering he sort of came out of left field.
That's true.
Yeah,
we got a lot to change, ladies and gentlemen. So with that said, we appreciate you.
What do we have coming up?
Well, why don't you tell people what you have coming up?
No, not me. For
yes.
the show.
Where are you going to be tomorrow, Jen? Where are you going to be Friday? Friday.
I am going to be in Evanston. I am going to be at Northwestern. I haven't been back there since I graduated, which was in 1994. And that is, I'm giving a talk for the college Dems at Northwestern U. And I don't normally do that. It's kind of exciting.
And I'm going to be holding down the fort for Jen. I'll be running errands.
You're going to be running errands. You are going to, he's picking up my kid from school tomorrow. That's
do you need a ride to the airport?
If you give me right to the airport.
I am actually of good use sometimes.
Sometimes you're helpful. So, but what do we have coming up?
On Monday, we'll probably have a candidate, but in the meantime,
that's really good.
We have got a very good mini panel that we are going to have. Friend of the show,
Harvey.
returning. Jen's secret love, Harvey K.
There's a few of these guys that have come on, these older gentlemen that I really find them very charming.
So Harvey K will be returning, but he's not coming alone, ladies and gentlemen. He's coming with none other than Alan Minsky from California. So we are going to have what is
Californian and a cheesehead.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. Midwesterner, and then, of course, a West Coaster. So it will be a wonderful Monday.
Yeah,
evening.
Harvey rocks. He's totally cool.
Yes. And we're going to have some other special guests going forward. Hope you guys enjoyed my pontification earlier.
Oh, Shahid's coming on Wednesday next week.
So Shahid Buttar is making his return. And what a time to do it. You know, I suggested last night, you know what's a good drinking game? Take a sip every time Pelosi stands up and cheers for Biden. Gulp, gulp, gulp. So,
God.
second Bill of Rights.
Oh, but you
that
know
is
what? Did she do anything to give me a kente cloth tail story?
They didn't wear their masks. Oh, the humanity of it all. So the second Bill of Rights. You are correct, Doug. That is what we're going to be talking about. So a very important topic. And whoever is going to be the progressive candidate in 2024 will need to run on the second Bill of Rights because it is time. With that said, we hope you enjoyed. We really appreciate you guys. And we'll see you on Monday.
Bye, all.